Colleen Moore has less name recognition today than, say, Clara Bow or Louise Brooks. But she was, without exaggeration, one of the most popular movie stars of the 1920s. From what I could find, only one book has been written about her, in addition to her own autobiography. So source material about her career outside of contemporary magazines is pretty sparse. But I've done my best to make an updated and very expanded remake of my original video from a few years ago. So this is the story of the one and only Colleen Moore. Although Colleen Moore claimed to be born on August 19, 1902, she was almost certainly born on the same day in 1899 in Port Huron, Michigan. Her real name was actually Kathleen Morrison, so I'll be referring to her as that for this first section. Kathleen's family didn't often stay in one place for very long at a time. And among other places, she lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and Tampa, Florida during her childhood. She became interested in acting at a young age, and starting in 1909, she and her younger brother Cleve put on little stage shows for neighborhood kids in the loft of their car barn in Atlanta. It was also around this time that Kathleen began going to movies, and got caught up in the emerging movie star culture. She actively honed her own acting skills, teaching herself to cry on cue. By her teenage years, she was determined to become a movie actress. As she later wrote, "I didn't just hope to go to Hollywood, I intended to." Her uncle Walter in Chicago was owed a favor by director D.W. Griffith for helping to get his movie The Birth of a Nation through Chicago's movie censors. So in 1916, Uncle Walter called in his favor, and Colleen made her first screen test at S&A Studios in Chicago, and got a 6-month contract at $50 a week. But being a none too worldly minor, her parents absolutely wouldn't allow her to go all the way to California by herself, so her grandmother volunteered to stay with her there. Pretty much from the get-go, Kathleen had her stage name already decided, Colleen Moore, which played up her Irish heritage. It's rumored that Colleen had an uncredited role in a 1916 movie, but her first confirmed role was in the 1917 movie The Bad Boy, starring Bobby Harron. She appeared in 2 more movies, and then her contract expired and wasn't renewed. These roles weren't very lucrative, and money was usually tight in those 6 months. Her family expected her to return home after her brief stint in the movies, but Colleen had other plans. She was able to get some work with the Selig Polyscope Company at $100 a week in 1918, and did movies with various other studios for the next couple of years. She then had a stint at Christie Studios at $200 a week in the early 1920s, getting a bit of comedy experience in the process. The Christies allowed her to do movies for other studios while she was with them, and she managed to get up to $500 a week. For pretty much all of these early roles, Colleen played good, pure girl parts, which weren't too far from her off-screen self. She was a tomboy, but was still a fairly innocent young woman. She was slowly climbing the ladder in terms of salary, though she was still a pretty small-time actress in the grand scheme of things. She got a pretty good break in 1920 when director Marshall Nealon wanted her for his movie Dinty, and she got $750 a week. And then she got to work again with Nealon and the famous actor John Barrymore the next year in The Lotus Eater. In 1921, Marshall Nealon called her up to ask if she would like to go to the Sunset Inn with him and his fiancée, Blanche Sweet, and a date he had lined up for Colleen. This man was John McCormick, and he had apparently fallen in love with Colleen from her movie appearances. That night, Colleen was taken with him, and John was persistent, calling her up at 5 a.m. the next morning and proclaiming his love for her. At 9 a.m., the first of John's gifts arrived at Colleen's door, a bouquet of flowers and a birthday card. Then came a series of 19 telegrams that arrived intermittently throughout the day that together told a fairy tale. John also sent candy, roses, a performance from an organ grinder with a monkey, and a carton of chewing gum. Exactly 1 year after they first met, they got engaged. Getting back to her career, Colleen signed a 4-movie deal with Goldwyn Pictures and had been chosen as one of the 1922 Wampus Baby Stars, which was a sign that the industry thought she had star potential. And she was now making $1,000 a week. She was pretty successful financially now, and had found a future husband, but she still hadn't gotten her big breakthrough yet. When her contract with Goldwyn was fulfilled, John helped her get a deal with First National Pictures. First National had been a film distributor for a while, but it was planning on getting into production and looking for some established actors to help get it going. And being a new company in film production, it would try and push the low and mid-tier actors it had more than another already established studio that already had a bunch of big stars on its roster. This could help a mid-tier actress like Colleen get more publicity and possibly achieve the status of movie star. It was a bit of a rough start though, because her first movie with them, The Huntress, performed poorly. Then, Colleen started lobbying for a potential role, and told John to plug her to First National for it, because he had gotten a behind-the-scenes job with the studio. The role was Patricia Fentress, and the movie was Flaming Youth. The character Patricia was a young woman who experiments with the flapper lifestyle, but ultimately ends up a good girl, with her virtue intact. Colleen had read the book that the movie was based off of, and desperately wanted the part. In addition to John's plugging, Colleen's mother suggested that Colleen bob her hair. Bobbed hair was still a fairly recent trend in 1923, and not too many movie actresses had gone through with it yet. The studio thought it was too much of a departure from Colleen's screen personality as an innocent girl, but Colleen later credited her newly bobbed hair with convincing them that she could do it. It should be noted, though, that this bob wasn't yet the famous Dutch bob Colleen would later become famous for. Around the time production for Flaming Youth got underway, Colleen got a bit of a shock in her personal life. During her engagement to John, he just disappeared for 2 days, making Colleen think something terrible had happened to him. She called one of his friends, who said that he was fine, and John showed up again later, unshaven and red-eyed. This was the first time Colleen saw the aftermath of one of his drinking benders. Her initial reaction was that she could help him get over his habit, but her mother suggested breaking off their engagement. Their marriage plans remained unchanged, however, and they tied the knot exactly 1 year after their engagement, on August 18, 1923. But Colleen immediately had second thoughts. A few weeks before they got married, John went on another drinking binge and disappeared for 3 days. He also got embarrassingly drunk at their wedding supper. Colleen said she spent much of that night crying after seeing her new husband become a different person, then saw him passed out on the floor of their guest room. The next day, John charmed her into forgiving him and said that he'd change his ways. This would be a continuing pattern. Meanwhile, the filming of Flaming Youth proceeded. The most memorable thing that happened was that Colleen had to jump off a yacht in the climactic scene and pretend to drown. The problem was that after she jumped in, she accidentally breathed in some water through her nose and choked on it underwater, so she came back up and called out for help and then sank under again. She later credited the future star actor Richard Arlen, then working as an extra, with jumping in and saving her. Immediately upon its release, Flaming Youth was a big hit, finally giving Colleen her true breakthrough movie. Censorship efforts and publicized bans on the movie hinted at its controversial subject matter. While there had been earlier efforts at flapper movies, like the 1920 movie The Flapper, Flaming Youth seemed to really capture this aspect of the zeitgeist of the times more than any other. It's hard to know exactly how it was portrayed, though, because aside from a surviving 11-minute fragment, it's a lost film. You can get a more in-depth discussion of Flaming Youth in my 1920s Lost Films compilation video. While the flapper craze had already begun, Flaming Youth added significant fuel to the fire, and Colleen immediately became associated with flapper roles. Her screen personality and her comedy skills shone through like never before, in a way that she couldn't do as much with her previous roles. Colleen and John went on a belated honeymoon right when Flaming Youth was a sensation, and they went to Europe, going to England, Ireland, and Switzerland. There, they experienced mobs of new fans, and they were also invited as the guests of honor to a theater opening in Zurich, where Flaming Youth would be played. Whatever Flaming Youth's objective quality was, it was clear that it had made Colleen Moore a star. And she now got paid like a star. She signed a new contract with First National, giving her $50,000 per movie for 4 movies. But Colleen didn't want to get typecast. She had just broken free from being typecast as an innocent girl, and didn't want a similar situation with flapper roles. In her next 2 movies, she didn't play flappers. Through the Dark was a mystery movie featuring the popular pulp character Boston Blackie, so Colleen's now realized comedy strengths were not on display. Even though her following movie, Painted People, sounded and looked like it might be a flapper movie, it wasn't. But Painted People proved that Colleen could please audiences even when given a not-too-strong story, and that her success in Flaming Youth was in fact due to her ability, and wasn't just a lucky break. But the 1924 movie, The Perfect Flapper, as you can probably guess, returned her to her new status as a film flapper. It isn't nearly as well known as Flaming Youth, and wasn't quite as popular as it back then, but it certainly wasn't a failure, and was rather successful. A role that Colleen really wanted was that of Selena in So Big, an adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Edna Ferber. With her new star status and proof that she had range, the studio ended up giving her the part, which she later said was her personal favorite movie role. This was also definitely not a flapper movie, and in fact took place in the late 1800s, where Selena was a poor but hard-working mother. The movie also demanded that Colleen be aged a few decades by the end. Around this time, we can also see one notable change after So Big. Colleen had changed her bob to its most famous version, the Dutch bob. In her next movie, Sally, she played a dancer. And the next movie after that, The Desert Flower, was actually a Western, though not her first. During a publicity photo shoot for The Desert Flower on top of a handcart, the cart moved suddenly, causing Colleen to fall off, and she dislocated 2 vertebrae in her neck. She had to recover for a number of weeks, with her neck in a cast that prevented her from sleeping laying down. Because of this injury, she had to sleep in a neck brace for the rest of her life. After about a year of not doing flapper roles, Colleen made another movie called We Moderns in 1925, where she played an English flapper. We Moderns was kind of just a weaker version of Flaming Youth, with the stories having a lot in common. Her next break from flapper roles would be longer this time. Instead, she pursued roles that she liked better, with a string of pretty strong movies in 1926. Irene, Ella Cinders, It Must Be Love, and Twinkle Toes. In these movies, she played, respectively, a working-class girl who becomes a model, a wannabe actress, the daughter of a delicatessen owner, and a dancer. This is just a sample of the variety of different roles she played other than flappers. They may not have been as hyped up as Flaming Youth, but they proved to be pretty reliable at the box office, and only served to improve Colleen's standing. I think in this way, she can be compared to Harold Lloyd, who only had a few movies that lasted decades in public memory, but all of his movies had been consistently successful. One big reason for this is that she had a team within the studio specifically working with her on her movies. The key to this long, successful run was consistency, and by this point, she had a regular schedule. In her autobiography, Colleen included an average day in her life when working on a movie around this time in her career, and here is a long excerpt. When I was working on a picture, I got up at 6:30 in the morning. I usually just put a polo coat on over my pajamas and was driven to the studio bungalow, where Catherine, my maid, had a bath drawn and breakfast ready to start when I walked in the door. After breakfast, I made up. Lucille, my hairdresser, arrived about this time. But since I wore my hair straight, all she had to do was keep it trimmed, and the bangs even. She also gave me a manicure when I needed one. While I was waiting to go to the set, the director would often come over to discuss problems, a retake of a scene shot the day before, or a new gag sequence. The studio press agent was always there discussing angles for a magazine story, or making arrangements for publicity pictures, or telling me what newsmen from what part of America or what foreign countries would be visiting the set that day. At 9 o'clock, I was on the set and ready to go to work. We broke for lunch around noon, then worked again until 5:30 or 6, after which we went to the projection room to see the previous day's work, the rushes as they were called. If we were satisfied with the work so far, we went home. Otherwise, we stayed on to discuss scenes we would retake the following day. Meanwhile, John's drinking problem became worse and worse. He would sometimes make an effort to get sober for a few weeks before falling back on the wagon. Colleen had to cover for him and make excuses for him while he was on binges. She became very bitter about it and confronted him, but little seemed to change. Despite all of this, Colleen said she still loved him. She even wanted to start a family, but John wanted to keep up the momentum of her career and said that she was still a little girl. By this point, he was practically obsessed with fine-tuning Colleen's screen persona and directing her career, though she still had a say in decisions related to her movies. Around the time that filming for Colleen's next movie, Orchids and Ermine, started, all of these problems with John nearly got her killed. One night in September 1926, Colleen and her friend, Mervyn Leroy, returned to the Ambassador Hotel in New York City to pick John up for a night out at a club. John was standing near an open window in the 16th floor room. Colleen could tell he had been drinking heavily and got angry. She went over to him and started hitting him on the back, telling him how he was going to ruin both of their careers with his drinking. John turned around, grabbed her, and tried to throw her out of the window. Mervyn LeRoy kicked him before he could and pulled Colleen away from him. They left, and John didn't return for 3 days. When he finally came back, Colleen said she wanted a divorce, and he responded by saying that she couldn't divorce him because she was a Catholic and she couldn't break her sacred vow. So they stayed together for now. His drinking binges were happening about once every month, and Colleen was beginning to realize that she couldn't fix him. All of this was happening as Colleen was reaching the peak of her fame. Her new contract, signed in mid-1925, gave her a staggering $125,000 per movie for 12 movies. She was voted the best box office attraction in a poll by the Exhibitors Herald in 1926, and was receiving 10,000 fan letters per week. Then, in 1927, John did another crazy thing. While preliminary work was being made on an upcoming movie titled Smiling Irish Eyes, John abruptly quit his job due in part to what he thought was a bad script, and also dragged Colleen with him, which caught her and the studio completely off guard. According to her contract, she still had the final say on scripts, but John acted like he had the final say, and she just went along with it. In her autobiography, Colleen explained her decision rather bafflingly, saying, "He always had done all right for me professionally, so there was nothing I could say." They were then sued by First National for $1 million for breach of contract. After stressful negotiations, everything was resolved, and John got a position at First National again. The planned movie that was at the center of this, Smiling Irish Eyes, was set aside for the time being. By 1927, Colleen was recognized for her consistent, high-quality entertainment. Really, since she had become a top-tier actress a few years before, she hadn't had a real flop. Commenting on her latest movie, Naughty But Nice, a writer in the Exhibitors Herald said, "It is almost inconceivable that an actress can be so good as Miss Moore and at the same time so consistent as Miss Moore. If she would do an occasional flop, turn out a bad one now and then by way of contrast, perhaps she would seem more human, in the trade sense, than she now appears. It gets almost tiresome to expect constantly better things of an actress, and suffer never a disappointment." Colleen's following movies were Her Wild Oat, Happiness Ahead, and OK. These were perhaps a slight step down from her 1926 movies, but not too far off. Then came a much bigger and one of the most ambitious productions of her career, Lilac Time. This one was kind of modeled after the Clara Bow movie Wings, the mega hit that was still making the rounds in 1928. Like Wings, Lilac Time was a story about a romance between a young woman and an aviator during World War I, featuring lots of cool airplane stunt work. And with its release well into 1928, a synchronized musical score was added to it for the new trend of sound films. Though, because the sound film trend was still pretty new, most versions released were silent. The bigger investment proved worth it, and it performed very well at the box office, another big boon for Colleen. And the recent success of another movie was a sign that things were changing in Hollywood. The Lights of New York was the first all-talking movie, and despite not being very good, the novelty was enough to rake in the profits. Then, the massive success of another full talkie, The Singing Fool, starring Al Jolson, really clinched it. Some studios, especially Warner Brothers and the Fox Film Corporation, had gotten in on talkies early, but others had been slower to respond, wondering if it would just be a passing trend. Now, the writing was on the wall. People wanted talkies. Despite this, John was still skeptical about talkies and didn't think they had a real future, so that's the path Colleen took. Her next two movies, Synthetic Sin and Why Be Good, which saw her in flapper roles again, would have synchronized music, but no talking. By the time Why Be Good was released in February 1929, virtually every major studio was putting out talkies, many of them part talkie, but increasingly full talkies. First National released its first part talkie in late 1928, and wouldn't release its first all-talkie until May 1929. The pressure was on to put established movie stars into talkies, and Colleen Moore was next. For her voice test, Colleen had to go inside a glass booth and speak some test sentences into the microphone. She chose to recite Little Bo Peep, and her voice was deemed satisfactory. For her talkie debut, Smiling Irish Eyes was brought back to the table, and it was also decided, not by her, that she would sing in it too. That's what pretty much everyone was doing then. Musicals were the perfect way to show off the new technology of talkies, and actors were being forced to sing everywhere. Colleen didn't like this because she didn't think she was a good singer. While her singing voice wasn't panned too much, the overall results of the movie were not good. Motion Picture News commented, "If First National figured this as a good vehicle for Colleen Moore, it would appear that they are badly mistaken. How anyone with a piece of box office material as valuable as the personality and following of this star could permit so utterly a poor picture to be released is beyond comprehension." Picture Play magazine chimed in that, "This picture is far, far below the gifts Miss Moore brings to it. In fact, it's rather dreadful in its commonplaceness, its self-conscious quaintness, and its falsely sentimental representation of Ireland." But Colleen's shining screen persona saved the movie from complete disaster. This kind of thing had happened before, but not on this scale. Smiling Irish Eyes was a rare misstep at this point in Colleen's career, but she was so appreciated and popular that even such a movie at such a critically important time in the industry didn't end her career, though it wouldn't last much longer regardless. Colleen's last movie of the 1920s was Footlights and Fools, another all-talkie, as most movies were now, and it was much better received. It was a pretty decent way to end the decade for her, and this would also prove to be a turning point in her life. Footlights and Fools completed her contract with First National, and she and John had just moved into their big new house in Bel Air. Colleen used this time to try and help John yet again. He had recently disappeared again and ended up in a hospital, but this time, Colleen let his parents go get him and bring him back. Doctors found that his liver was very damaged, and he needed to get sober or else he could die. After an especially brutal regimen to get him off alcohol, he quickly went off the wagon again, and then told Colleen that he could destroy her career if he wanted to. Now she knew for certain that John was a lost cause, and she moved out of her brand new house and went to live with her parents. Colleen and John kept up appearances, and she still came to the Bel Air house to entertain guests. In November 1929, she had an attack of appendicitis and underwent surgery for it around the time that Footlights and Fools was released. Her contract was not going to be renewed, and so she ended the 1920s not entirely sure if her movie career was at an end. In March 1930, she had finally reached her limit with John and asked him for a divorce. When she told him, John began to choke her, but she was saved by her chauffeur, who had come in from the hall. The divorce was finalized the next year. John married again, but it only lasted a few months. He married a third time, but that one only lasted a few years. He managed to live until 1961, dying at the age of 67. Colleen made a few more movies between 1933 and 1934, then retired from the industry for good. She didn't seem to like making talkies anyway, a common reason why some actors decided to retire around this time. She also remarried, got divorced amicably, then married a third time much more successfully, and adopted her third husband's 2 children. In the late 1960s, she wrote an autobiography, as well as a book on investing for women, a sign of her smart handling of money throughout her career. Unlike many other 1920s actors and actresses, Colleen lived comfortably for the rest of her life. After her third husband's death, she married again, and that one lasted until her death on January 25, 1988, at the age of 88. Colleen Moore was one of the most beloved movie actresses of the 1920s, but her movies are much less remembered than some of her contemporaries, especially her non-flapper ones. A major reason for this is that a significant portion of her movies have been lost. In the 1940s, Colleen had donated copies of 15 of her movies to be preserved for posterity, but they were not properly stored and deteriorated. Other copies of some of those 15 movies were later found, but others have been lost ever since. As of now, the movies Come On Over, Flaming Youth, So Big, Sally, and Happiness Ahead have never resurfaced. Also lost are some other movies from the peak of her career, like Painted People, Flirting with Love, The Desert Flower, We Moderns, It Must Be Love, Smiling Irish Eyes, and Footlights and Fools. And from what I've been able to find, quite a few of her surviving movies have only been released in poor quality, and are desperately in need of being restored and re-released in an updated format. Some of her other surviving movies have never been fully released to the public even to this day, further obscuring her legacy. But Colleen's legacy lives on in a different way. Since the 1920s, she and her father worked on building an intricate and expensive fairy castle. From a technological perspective, it was very complex, and for that reason, it's been on display at the recently renamed Griffin Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago since 1949. People now may know Colleen more for that than for her movie career. Colleen didn't always play flappers. In fact, she didn't play them more than she did play them, and she wasn't really a flapper in her personal life. But to many people, she symbolized the new and modern liberated woman of the 1920s, though not an especially radical one. Owing much to her performance, the #1 authority on the hip side of the 1920s, F. Scott Fitzgerald, singled out Flaming Youth as the best portrayal of the jazz age. And his comment about Colleen continues to circulate around. He said, "I was the spark that lit up Flaming Youth. Colleen Moore was the torch." I really hope you enjoyed this video because I've been wanting to remake this one for a long time. A little while back, I was able to buy a signed copy of her autobiography, and it reminded me that I needed to get on that. I just hope that this video can help revive interest in Colleen and her career, even if we no longer have many of her movies. And there really aren't many videos about her life other than my original one, so I'm gonna need your guys' help to spread this video around and share her story. Well, that's all for now, all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.